December 13th meeting of Westwood Planning Board. First, we'll take a roll call vote to introduce board members. Josh. Just say here, if you could.
Josh, you're on mute.
Here.
Ellen.
Here.
Kate.
Here.
Phil.
Bill, can you hear?
Can we tell if he's muted?
You're
He's
muted,
not
Phil.
muted.
Oh,
No, I don't
wait,
think
no,
he
he's
is.
raising his hand. Hold on.
Okay, I will take the hand raised as a here. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay, this meeting is recorded by Westwood Media Center, broadcast live on local cable television, Comcast Channel 12 and Verizon Channel 42. Meetings are also live on the Westwood Media Center's YouTube channel. If you're interested in joining the meeting via Zoom, you can find the login directions of the Planning Board meeting notice that's posted in the calendar section of the town's webpage at www.townhall.westwood.ma.us. We'll begin the meeting with only the board members and staff unmuted and on video. As the chair recognizes individuals to speak, we will unmute them. Board members may then choose to mute themselves when they're not speaking in order to minimize background noise. For applications, the chair will first invite the applicants to address the board and give a presentation summarizing of what is being requested. Board members receive the application materials prior to the meeting and will have reviewed them. Board members may ask questions during and following the presentation. Staff and outside experts will provide comments to the board. If the issue includes a public hearing, the board will then proceed to public comment portion of the public hearing and will restate the instructions. Thank you. In this remote meeting format, residents and guests may participate in several ways. Attendees should raise their hand and wait to be unmuted and recognized to speak over the Zoom meeting application or from a telephone dial-up. We will be able to hear you but not see you. Additionally, comments may be submitted by email or regular mail prior to the meeting. When we come to that part of the meeting, I will remind everyone of the process. Following the public comment portion, the board will deliberate and make a decision or continue the hearing to a specific future date. All remote meetings require that votes be taken by roll call. When a motion and a second has been made, the chair will ask if there's any further discussion before proceeding to a roll call vote and will then restate the results of the vote. Nora, do we have any changes to tonight's agenda?
We have a, the agenda was revised last week before the meeting. We have one item, a public hearing that was scheduled for 24M. It was continued to this meeting and they've asked for continuance. So that's the second item on your agenda tonight. And they've asked you to continue it to your January 3rd meeting.
So if anyone is in the audience here for that hearing, we will be continuing that till our January 3rd meeting. And that's was so we take that out of order and vote to continue now or wait?
Yeah, you can continue that when you get to it at the next item. So the first item up for discussion tonight is 790 Gay Street. You approved a minor modification for some drainage changes a couple of months ago. And one of the conditions was that they come back with a revised landscape plan that they sent first to the Conservation Commission and had that approved. This is a landscape plan for restoration of the trees that were accidentally removed on the fire lane.
Okay. And who do we have here from the applicant?
Roberto Fitzgerald is here to discuss this application.
Yes, hi. There may also be John Cummings and TJ Dayhill. I'm not sure if either one of them are here.
I see TJ, I don't see John.
Okay.
I'll make TJ a panelist.
And I'm not sure if Chin Lin is here either.
Not yet.
Okay. I can go ahead and get started. TJ Dayhill is a project manager from Bright Builders, and I'm Rob Fitzgerald with Dornwood Architects. We are here tonight because we are continuing on the tree planting mitigation at the fire access lane, the fire access trail, and we reviewed the plan with the Conservation Commission, reviewed it with the tree warden, and everyone seems in accordance with the plan that we've presented. I'm happy to share the plan again. Not sure what else you would like us to do at this point.
Did you want to share your screen and show the final plan?
Sure, I could do that. So, are you able to see the plan now? Do you see
Yes.
that? Okay. So at one of our last meetings, the request was essentially to go from to not have any one caliper trees and instead use fewer trees with but increase them to at least a minimum of 2-inch caliper. And so that's what we've done in this layout here. And so you can see we've got a mix of red oak and white pine, approximately 115 trees that are extending along this entire stretch of area here where the tree mitigation work is planned. And this area in green represents essentially this area here. So this is like a typical planting layout. So in this section, for example, there's 23 trees and 30 bushes just in this area here. And again, we've reviewed this with the Conservation Commission and received acceptance there. Happy to answer any other questions that anyone has.
In your packet, I provide you with a copy of the modified order of conditions that was issued by the Conservation Commission to reflect this revised landscape plan.
So you're saying this green shaded area is a typical section, but how big is the section? Can you remind us again that was affected?
Yep. So this is Laura Lane here. This is the proposed building layout here. Mm-hmm. So you can see it essentially extends across this area here and a little bit in this area as well. Our landscape architect will go out and assist locating trees in that process to make sure that it complies with this intended layout. So like I said, this green area clouded here kind of represents approximately this area here. So this will extend all the way over to this area and this area as well.
Okay, and this is the plan that was approved by Conservation?
It is.
Yeah.
Okay. And when did they approve it? October time?
Yes. The decision, I believe, was signed December 1st, I think.
Okay.
I know it's in your packet, but I believe it was approved.
Yeah, I thought I saw in October, but that's fine. That's fine. So this has been out there for a little bit. Okay. Do any board members have questions for the applicant?
No, Chris, I just wanted to say thank you for all the hard work that went into this.
Thank you.
So if the board is ready to make a motion, this is not a public hearing, it's a minor modification, but if you want to take any public comment, I see there's a hand raised.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Wasn't looking in there. Sure, I guess we can take questions. Joe Previtera, you have your hand raised.
Joe, you're allowed to speak.
Chris, help me out. I did a screenshot from the plan that we discussed before, and I want to walk through that. If you can call the plan up that the Concom approved, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
So, Joe, you saying you want to reconcile that with the screenshot you took of last time the planning board discussed this?
Yeah. So on that night, we had 20 red oak, which matches. And then we had another 25 red oak, 2-inch DBH. And then we had 35 red oak, says number 7. And then we had 15 white pine, which let me look at the DBH. Okay. And then we had 25 white pine, 6 to 7. I don't see that. And then we had 20 white pine, 4-inch. And we had a total of 140 trees per Scott and Jeff that was agreed upon that night, 2-inch DBH. So I'd really like to reconcile these numbers. I really like to reconcile the totals, please.
Sure. That was the original plan. And what we heard was that they didn't want any trees that were 1 caliper. And so we've taken the same value of trees because our contract documents document a specific value per tree. And we've reconciled that with providing a minimum of 2-inch caliper, which is what we've done now. And so we've reduced the total number of trees from 140 to 115 in order to provide bigger trees, which was what was requested. And that was what was reviewed at the last Conservation Commission, submitted at the last Conservation Commission, and accepted at the last Conservation Commission meeting.
But just for the record, 140 trees were agreed upon by Scott and Jeff, 2-inch DBH. So you've downsized.
I respectfully disagree that was what was agreed upon. I don't want to get into a discussion on this. I'm just stating what we had presented and submitted and discussed, which was, again, as I mentioned, we reduced the number of trees and upsized them to be a minimum of 2 inches. And that was discussed at our past meeting.
But Rob, if I go back to that meeting, go to the Westwood Media Center, Jeff agreed they would all be 2-inch DBH. All 140 trees would be 2-inch DBH.
Like I said, I respectfully disagree. That's not what was agreed upon.
Rob, if you could stop sharing for a second, I have a copy of the order of conditions modification here, which I can put up. Everyone see that? This is was signed by the conservation agent, Karen Skinner-Catroni, on December 1st, and it references the plan that Rob just showed you, which was revised, I think, through November 5th, is it? I don't have that plan anymore. And this clearly says that please be advised that at their October 26, 2022 meeting, the Westwood Conservation Commission unanimously agree that the proposed change to the approved plan to replant 20 red oak trees, 3-inch DBH, 45 red oak trees, 2-inch DBH, 15 white pine trees, 3-inch DBH, 35 white pine trees, 2-inch DBH, and 150 low bush blueberry shrubs, as shown on the plans that you just saw here, revised through, November 8th, 2022. So that's the signed statement that we've received from the conservation agent, reflecting what she believes occurred at the Conservation Commission meeting.
Thank you, Nora, for pulling that up.
Nora, I understand that, but I, along with other neighbors, believe there are going to be 140 trees planted based upon the earlier meeting. So are you saying that we need to?
I'm saying that the Conservation Commission approved the plan that was submitted with the reduction in the number of trees and the increase in the size of the trees. So it was, I think the original plan or the plan showed at the October meeting had 140 trees, including a number of trees that were 1-inch caliber. And the Conservation Commission agreed to allow fewer trees if they were all 2-inch in caliber. And this is the plan that came back.
Despite the fact that Jeff said they would all be 2-inch DBH.
They are all 2 or 3-inch DBH.
No, I'm talking about at the October meeting.
Whose October meeting are you referring to?
Conservation Commission.
Conservation, okay. I have to go by what we've received in this communication personally, and I'm not about to go back on conservation's authorization, and I'm not certainly going to second guess what they approved based on this letter of December 1.
Okay, so the total number, Chris, is how many from 140 to how many?
115, is that right, Robert?
115 trees and 150 low bush blueberry shrubs. And all the trees are 2 or 3-inch caliber.
Thanks very much. I'm done, Chris.
Okay, thank you. We'll leave a few seconds to allow anyone else to raise their hand if they want for public comment. I see Joe's hand, I think, is still up. I don't know if that...
Sorry, Chris.
No, it's okay.
Chris, if I could,
Yes, Phil.
just a quick question, Rob. What is the status of replacement if deer or other natural causes with respect to what was approved by Concon? What happens if some of them die?
So the Conservation Commission has a 2-year window that they look back at to make sure that the trees are thriving after 2 years. And if they're not, they require replacement. And every time they're replaced, that window starts over. For the planning board, it's a little bit different. Planning board requires plantings associated with the project forever. So this is a little bit odd because it's in a natural area. It's not landscaped ornamentation plantings. So the plantings that are street trees or that are plantings around the foundation of the new school building, we would clearly hold to that requirement. This is more in a natural area, so it's a little hard to tell if which trees are thriving in the natural area and which have just naturally succumbed over time. But we would take a look at this and it's town property. So the town is the one that's responsible for replacing trees if the trees die. And I think we'd have to evaluate the natural areas on a case-by-case basis, because these new trees may survive, but we may lose some older trees in that area as you do in a natural wooded area.
I understand, Nora, but these are trees that were mistakenly removed. So that is really their responsibility as compared to the town's responsibility. So that's why I'm asking, because there was discussion about trying to have the replacement as part of the approval package, at least from my recollection of the last meeting.
So the replacement is being done by the contractor under the contract with the town. So they accidentally removed the trees. They are the ones replacing the trees. And the contract is being managed by the Permanent Building Committee, not by the Conservation Commission and not by the Planning Board. So how those trees are paid for, who puts them in, when they go in, that's all before the Permanent Building Committee. But this board is approving revised plans, and the revised plans show now, in addition to all the landscape plans, the landscape plantings that were approved in the original site plan review approval, now you have these additional trees that are being added to that approval. So there's a revised plan. The intention is certainly to make sure that the trees thrive. The Conservation Commission will look after them for the first 2 years, After that, the town will look out after them. We'll have to leave it to the permanent building committee to decide how they determine at what point the contractor is no longer responsible and the town is. That's a contractual issue, and that really is not our issue. The decision that's before the planning board, the site plan review, is between the planning board and the applicant. In this case, the applicant is the town. So you are putting an obligation on the town to maintain these plantings and to build the school project as approved. The town, through its permanent building committee, then works to have that done through its contractor. But we're not, the planning board is not a party to that contract. So I think if you look at this very much like if it was a private project, say there was a project you recently reviewed on University Avenue where the applicant came, he had a landscape plan that was approved years ago, came back before the board because he wanted to alter that plan. The board decided he couldn't alter it, he had to put in the trees. Then that was the applicant's responsibility. He went back and put in the trees. Be the same thing. In this case, the applicant is the town. The town's
Not really,
responsible.
but if the contractor had breached the contract or had made some mistake, which
That's up to,
occurs,
that's
that
right.
occurs, then as part of the, what is essentially an amendment to the agreement, you can also stipulate replacement, because otherwise you would have had the original, longer growth trees being in place.
That's right, but that's within the purview of the management of the contract between the town and the contractor, which is before the permanent building committee, not before the
Understood.
planning board. So the planning board decides what's the appropriate landscape plan and approves whatever it deems to be appropriate. In this case, the board at its last meeting, when it considered all the drainage changes and grading changes, the board deferred the landscape plan to the Conservation Commission, said get it approved by the Conservation Commission, bring it back to us once it's approved so that we can accept it. So
Right.
tonight you decide if you'll accept it or not, but we'll leave it to the Permanent Building Committee to determine how the trees are planted and paid for by the contractor and how long the contractor is responsible for maintaining them.
But let me get back to the question, which is, we deferred to the Conservation Commission, but I didn't see anything in the Conservation Commission's decision that relates to replacement. So is it fair to say that there is no replacement
No,
obligation?
Yes, in the Conservation Commission's order of conditions, there is a standard condition requiring all plantings be maintained for a minimum of 2 years.
Mhm.
That was in the original Conservation Commission's order of conditions, and it's in the modified one. And so the Conservation Commission will look at these plants for 2 years to make sure they survive. And if they don't, they will go to the applicant, the town, and ask for them to be replaced. The town, through its permanent building committee, will then look to the contractor to replace them if they've died. I don't know what the terms of that relationship with the contractor is and how long that will last. That's not before us. That's not before the Conservation Commission. That's fully in the hands of the Permanent Building Committee to manage their contract. I'm sure that they have some reasonable period of time that they'll require the developer, the contractor, to be responsible for replacement. But after that, if 10 years down the line, some trees on the property die, it is the town that's responsible for replacing them.
Okay.
Any other board members with comments or questions for the applicant or Nora? Okay, I'm not seeing any. I don't see any hands raised with our attendees. Nora, do we have draft language?
We do. Just 1 second, I'll put it up.
Okay, if anyone on the board is inclined, you may make a motion that's before us.
So I move that the planning board grant the proposed landscape modification to the limited environmental impact and design review EIDR approval for the Hanlon-Deerfield Elementary School project as described in the application, therefore submitted to the planning board and filed in the office of the town clerk on September 15th, 2022, subject to the following conditions. 1, except as modified by the conditions and findings hereof, the project shall comply with the project plans. and with the conditions of all prior approvals in all respects, and the applicant shall pursue completion of the project with reasonable diligence and continuity. 2, if the project or any condition imposed in this decision requires permit, license, or other approval from any board or commission, including the Westwood Conservation Commission, Westwood Zoning Board of Appeals, Westwood Select Board, or any agency of the town of Westwood, or other regulatory agency of the Commonwealth or the federal government, the applicant shall make an appropriate application for the same. If any condition of such permit, license, or other approval from any other board, committee, or agency is inconsistent with this decision, the applicant shall make application to the planning board for an amendment of this decision, and the planning board shall consider such application in accordance with the requirements of MGL Chapter 40A, Section 9, and all applicable planning board rules and regulations. 3, the applicant shall submit a final revised plan set, including civil site plans and architectural design plans, revised to incorporate all approved modifications in PDF format. Said plan set shall be submitted to the town planner for the planning board's file. 4, all landscaping approved herein shall be installed between April 15th and June 15th, 2023. Any plantings that do not survive shall be replaced in kind in perpetuity. 5, a copy of this decision and the project plans shall be kept on the project site at all times during construction.
Second. You're on mute, Chris.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Kate,
Aye.
Josh,
Aye.
Phil,
Aye.
Ellen,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. No need to close this, right, Nora? This is not a hearing.
No, this was not a hearing.
Great. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much. Best of luck.
Thanks.
Okay, Nora, what's next on our agenda?
So
The
next you have the
continuation?
continuation of the 24M hearing. So let me get you.
Did I see that was continued to January? I thought.
Yes, January 3rd.
Right, okay, I just wanted to make sure that it was, yes, that's what I thought.
Sorry, I just have a quick question before we move on. Are we not talking about the drainage for the school?
You
I thought I saw
approved,
that.
you already approved the drainage at a prior meeting. I believe it was at your October 25th meeting.
So that stuff's in the packet just because,
Just for information, because it's the same application. It was one
Okay.
application that was submitted. So if you wanted to go back and look at it, but the
Got
drainage
it.
has all been approved. The approval decision for that drainage approval had a condition
Right.
requiring them to come back with the landscape plan.
okay, I was just a little confused why that was it. If it's just for reference, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure before we moved on that there was nothing else we had to talk about that, because I was like,
Sorry.
yeah, no worries. I more information is better than less. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing something before we moved on to the next topic.
Okay, you're not. So that project is, all its approvals are in place now.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we have motion language to continue the hearing. If someone would like to make this motion.
I move that the planning board continue the public hearing for the flexible multi-use overlay district 1 FMUOD 1 special permit application for a 24M lithium ion battery research and development facility at 26 Dartmouth Street to Tuesday, January 3rd, 2023 at 7 p.m. via Zoom, where Zoom link and associated call-in numbers will be provided on town's calendar on the homepage at https://www.townhall.westwood.ma.us/.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to continue this. We'll take a roll call vote. Oh, any further discussion? Sorry.
Actually,
Oh, yeah.
I just had a question for Nora. Has the applicant sort of made any progress with any of the asks or information, or is that sort of part of why they need a continuance?
That's part of why they need it. So they have your list of questions. They also have their first list of comments from Beta and
Yeah, I saw
the
that.
first list from Weston and Sampson.
Good
They're
to do it.
compiling all of that, and they're scheduling a meeting with the consultants from Beta and Weston and Sampson together. And then the three engineering firms will discuss it and then come back.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we had a motion and a second and a little discussion. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Josh?
Aye.
Ellen?
Aye.
Kate?
Aye.
Phil?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. So this is continued to our January 3rd meeting via Zoom. Okay, next on the list, Nora?
Next on the list is a discussion of potential zoning and general bylaw amendments that the board may be presenting to the select board. I knew it was very late. I sent out a draft last night or early this morning, and I've worked on it some more and added a little bit more to it. So I will share my screen and maybe we can go through the different articles in the draft. Okay, so I've created the draft in the form of the hearing notice just to save time. So it'll be in that form eventually. We already have the Zoom link all ready for the meeting. So it's just the text of the articles that we need to discuss and to make sure that these are the articles you still want to go forward with. The first proposed article is related to earth material movement. And what this article would do is remove earth material movement from a planning board EIDR approval and make it an administrative EIDR approval. So the first step in that is making an amendment to section 4.1.6 of the table of principal uses. The way that table was written, it called for earth material movement per section 7.1, which is the section of the bylaw that talks about earth material movement. And it had PB in all districts. And PB meant that there was a special permit required by the planning board. So now I've changed that to a no, that earth material movement as a principal use is simply not allowed. It's only allowed as an accessory use. So a principal use of earth material movement would be a sand and gravel plant. That's not permitted in any district. So I amended the chart to demonstrate that. So that's the first portion of the proposed bylaw amendment. And then move down to amending the accessory use chart. It's never been in there. It probably always should have been, but now I've made sure it's in the accessory use chart, earth material movement as an accessory use, which is what you've seen meeting after meeting after meeting, whenever anyone wants to redevelop their property and has to bring in a lot of fill or take out a lot of fill, that's an accessory use during the period of the construction. So I've now amended the bylaw saying that that's allowed everywhere, but it's allowed pursuant to section 7.1. And then I'm proposing amendments to section 7.1. The majority of the amendments simply take out planning board and replace it with town planner, and take out administrative EIDR or EMM-EIDR for earth material movement administrative, earth material movement environmental impact design review, and replace that with administrative earth material movement. So the procedure is the same, except instead of going to the planning board, they go to the town planner. The application process is the same. It's done electronically, just like it is now. The submittal items are the same. Nothing changes other than the fact that there's not a hearing before this board. And I've added to the list of application requirements, I've added a section 7.1.3.8, which requires an applicant to submit a signed copy of their land disturbance permit or administrative land disturbance permit approval that was issued under either the Westwood Stormwater Management Bylaw or a signed copy of the Order of Conditions if it was issued under Wetlands Protection Act and Westwood Wetlands Protection Bylaw. That previously was not an application requirement. So when many of the applicants would come to the planning board, they were still before the Concom and they hadn't yet gotten their approval of the drainage. And that's what I believe caused a lot of the issues where abutters that would have concerns would come to the planning board expecting them to address the drainage concern that was really rightly before the Conservation Commission. So now if this is approved by town meeting, if it's supported by the planning board and submitted to the select board and approved by town meeting, It would change the process to just administrative review, but it would be very clear that before they could come for that administrative review, they still have to go through the formal process with the Conservation Commission for their stormwater management. So then moving along, a decision is issued. It would be essentially the same decision, only instead of being a decision of the planning board, it's just a decision of the town planner. And I do have a section here. We can discuss whether we want to add it or not. In our environmental impact and design review section of the bylaw, when there's an administrative EIDR approval, if an applicant doesn't like the conditions that are put on them under that approval, they can then go to the planning board for a fully EIDR approval. So I leave it up to the board to determine if that's something that you want to offer, or if you just want to have applicants understand they have to accept the conditions. In the case of an earth material movement approval, the conditions are very straightforward. It's really just about the transportation of the fill, what streets they can go down, the fact that they have to repair damages to streets or sidewalks or to adjacent properties, that they can't have their drainage flowing onto other properties. Those are all the conditions that I can't really imagine that if the town planner required that the planning board would waive anyhow. So, so I didn't put in another step to bring it before the planning board as an appeal. What that would mean is if there's a decision that's issued and an applicant is not happy with the conditions, then they would take it to the Zoning Board of Appeals as an appeal of the town planner's decision. That's the process that we go through, and the planning board then would not have to have any involvement with earth material movement. So most of this section, the conditions are the same as they are now under the planning board. All of the requirements are the same. It's simply a case of the town planner reviewing it instead of the planning board. The time limitations are the same. It's valid for 2 years. The exemptions are the same. If you move less than 200 cubic yards in residential districts or less than 250 cubic yards in non-residential districts, you don't have to apply for this. And if all of your fill is coming from the excavation hole, you don't have to apply for this. Agricultural, horticultural, floricultural uses don't have to apply, and governmental uses are also exempt. This also says that in the case of a subdivision, the planning board approves the subdivision, which affects the roads in the subdivision, but individual lots still have to apply for EMM approval, administrative EMM approval if they're necessary. And then this last section was here before. This talked about the existing earth material operation. So if there is someone that claims that they have a sand and gravel pit somewhere in Westwood now, and it was operating under a special permit or a site plan approval, I'm not aware of any, but this section was in here, and just to protect us, I left it in here, but I took out the section that talks about a new EIDR approval to start one of those facilities. Instead, in the use chart, it's clear that it's simply not allowed. So that's it for that section. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
So Nora, just thank you very much. That's in my mind, that's exactly what I was looking for when we started talking about it. Currently, what, if any, what is the appeal process if they come to the planning board and they disagree with our conditions? Is there any recourse?
Yep, they can either appeal your decision to the Zoning Board of Appeals, or they can appeal your decision to Superior Court. In most cases, decisions go right to Superior Court.
Okay. And your proposal would basically put that back with the Zoning Board of Appeals.
It would, by not specifying it. So an applicant always has the opportunity to take a decision to Superior Court. If they jumped over the zoning board and went right to court with a staff decision, I think that our town council would probably say that they've failed to go after all of the possible remedies. And
there's a defense that you must exhaust your administrative remedies before you go into court, and that would probably be our position on something like that.
So rather than mention appeals in this section, it's just the appeals at the end of the bylaw that apply to any decision of any town staff member or board under the zoning bylaw would be taken to the Zoning Board of Appeals.
So I like where this is taking us. I want to make sure that we're not setting up a town planner to fail. It's hard to see around every corner, but Nora, from a perspective of a town planner, do you see any possibilities here, realistic possibilities where the town planner is going to be put in a bad position?
So the only thing I would say is that you might have some applicants who want to apply pressure on a single person that's making a decision as opposed to a board of 5. But the actual workload that gets into it for the town planner is exactly the same. They receive the same application, they process it less the hearing notice that would no longer be necessary. They write the conditions, they discuss it with the applicant, they approve the decision with those conditions, they file the decision. So the process, all the steps along the way, except for the hearing itself, are really the same. So I definitely don't see this as more work for the planner. In fact, it would be a little bit less work in not having to advertise for a public hearing. So the only difference I would see is that there are probably some developers who would, who may think that they'd have a better chance of not having to get their approval decision from the town planner, but that simply isn't a possibility. The building commissioner will not issue a permit without an earth material movement decision. And the decision conditions are so consistent from one decision to the next that I think this will eventually be as simple as a building permit. You know, people will just understand that this is simply something, part of what you have to do if you want to do your project.
So I
And
also,
again, we're not, yeah, I was going to ask you from a legal perspective.
I don't, it's impossible to tell all
Right.
unintended consequences when you make a zoning change. But I think Nora's got this one pretty tight, as always. And I look back over the past year, how much time this board spent on earth material movement that is relatively routine and can be done administratively to allow you to do some of the other things that you want to get to for the benefit of the town. I think that's a good trade for both involved.
And when we first started earth material movement, we didn't have a stormwater bylaw. So the planning board, or at that time was the zoning board of appeals, was really looking at everything from a drainage perspective as well as from the actual movement of the earth. We've now bifurcated it. We have the Conservation Commission that's looking just at that drainage, and then the drainage solution comes in as part of the earth material movement. So this is really just about the dirt. Double checking the Conservation Commission has dotted the I's and crossed the T's, and then making plans for where you travel with that earth material.
And that's where you, over the past year, have spent a lot of time talking about water issues rather than the earth material movement part. So that's more properly focused before the Conservation Commission, in my opinion.
All right. Any other board members? I don't mean to monopolize the conversation here. So if anyone else have anything to say or questions to ask?
I just had a quick question, Nora. Since this has to be approved, is there an effective date, and then the second question would be, it would obviously be after the town meeting, but does it apply only to new applications, or is there effectively a grandfathering of ones that might be already in process?
So what happens whenever there's a zoning change, the change doesn't take effect until town meeting has approved it and the Attorney General's office has then approved the town meeting approval.
Right.
But once it becomes effective, it's retroactive to the date of town meeting. And there's some case law that says if you've had to advertise for the first public hearing, it's effective from that date. No one could act contrary to that bylaw prior to the first date of the public hearing. However, in this case, because you're lessening the requirements,
right,
there would be no issue if someone files for an earth material movement approval until it's fully approved by the Attorney General's office. I do think we have to bring it to the planning board. We can cover ourselves by
that was going to be my
decisions.
question.
Yes.
If it was not approved by the Attorney General for God knows what reason, but if there were applications that had been done administratively during essentially the, interim period, they could possibly be not properly
Right,
granted?
so we wouldn't do that. We would
Okay.
continue to act under the current bylaw unless and until the Attorney General fully approves. the new bylaw.
Okay, that was my question.
So we own this till next fall at least.
Right,
Okay.
Till the end of August, probably.
but there's a light at the end of the
Okay.
tunnel.
It's a good way to put it.
So I have a joke question. My question is this the type of a change that will get us a little earlier in the agenda at the town meeting, or like, can we sweeten this somehow that everybody wants to talk about? It's a little, I love it, but I think it's not as exciting to anybody but us.
Town meeting agenda is not up for discussion tonight.
Ugh, okay.
Nice try though, Kate.
All right, if there are no questions on that, I'll move on to the next one, which is a proposed article on sustainability amendments. So these are kind of in different sections of the bylaw. I just pulled out any changes I thought that could be directly or indirectly related to sustainability. So the first change comes in section 6.1, where we have off-street parking. I added a section requiring motor vehicle charging stations for all parking lots with at least 25 parking spaces, and they would be required at the rate of 1 charging space and charging station for every 25 parking spaces. For example, at the new Wentworth Hall that the town built, we have 32 parking spaces. We chose to put in 2 charging stations there. It's usually most charging stations are a double. It doesn't cost you more to have a double one than a single one. So in this case, we would require for every 50 cars in a parking lot, you'd need one of those double stations. I don't think it's onerous. I think that over time, we'll see more businesses just put in charging stations of their own volition. But until that happens, then I think for any new developments or redevelopments, this is something the planning board can do to require it. And it's not too onerous, I don't believe. In fact, right now, Eversource has some pretty good incentives for people who want to put in charging stations. And the next section changes to the environmental impact and design standards. And this is probably where the biggest change is. We have a section right now in those standards that is called energy efficiency, and it has a statement requiring energy efficiency. I've expanded that to go much further and called the overall standard sustainability, and then broke it down into some different components, including energy efficiency, but also including energy conscious design, water efficiency, and renewable energy. So the way this reads now, sustainability would be the standard that would have to be met. All proposals shall include analysis of greenhouse gas impacts and shall incorporate sustainable measures and practices that demonstrate a measurable reduction in greenhouse gas impact as follows. The first is energy conscious design. All proposals shall adhere to the principles of energy conscious design with regard to building orientation, building materials, shading, landscaping, and other elements. Efforts shall be made to harmonize energy-related components with the character of the building and its surroundings, and to prevent adverse effects on the energy consumption of neighboring structures and on the environment. So that takes into account protecting someone else's photovoltaic panels. You can't shade out your neighbor. Energy efficiency, all proposals shall utilize energy efficient technology in building materials, lighting, heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems, including without limitation geothermal systems, white roofing, daylighting, and LED technology and similar measures. You can add anything to that if someone wants something else in there. Water efficiency, I actually took this out of our University Station section. We already required it there. All proposals shall utilize water saving technology, including water sensor equivalent fixtures for toilets, faucets, urinals, showers, pre-rinse nozzles, and irrigation controllers and similar measures. And then renewable energy, and this I'm trying to get at something that's come up for discussion at several recent approval hearings. All proposals shall incorporate renewable energy resources. Non-residential structures exceeding 5,000 square feet in floor area shall incorporate photovoltaic panels and or wind turbines sufficient to produce a minimum of 50% of the structures, that should be possessive structures, projected energy use. Then I went on to look at other sections of the bylaw. We have a section under our submittal requirements for an EIDR review that requires that it just kind of loosely says you have to show trees. So I've expanded that to say that you have to show the location, type, size, and dimension of all existing trees with a caliper size of 6 inches or greater. And the reason I use 6 inches is further down in the bylaw, there's already a standard that the board is supposed to apply to its decisions, saying that you've protected all the trees of 6 inches or larger where possible. Here's another change. I put it under this sustainability because I was making amendments to this section at the time. We can decide if this is appropriate or if it should stand on its own. The board has so many waivers it's requested at each meeting, time and time again. You get a request for waivers, and every single time you waive the model. So I tried to rewrite the model section so that it's only required if the board asks for it, and then you don't have to waive it anymore. I can only remember one model in 15 years being required by the planning board. So I don't know if that's really sustainability, unless you think that you're wasting the paper and waiving it. I don't know. Next, preservation of landscape. This also goes at the tree issue. It had said tree and soil removal should be minimized. I've changed it to say existing trees with a caliper size of 6 inches or greater shall be maintained or relocated wherever possible. I tried to make it a little bit stronger, but also give the board flexibility. Obviously, you can't save every tree on a property, but you can save the best ones and hopefully relocate trees that can be relocated. So that's all the provisions for sustainability that I captured here. I don't know if that addresses everyone's concerns or if there were others that you'd like to add.
Nora, I had a couple questions. I guess I'll start with the one that you have up there. Do we want any language for preservation of landscape to include invasive versus non-invasive species? Are we trying to save non-invasive species that are 8 inches, 10 inches big?
So I think there's a value to a shade tree, whether or not it's an invasive species, if it's a mature tree. So maybe you have some Norway maples that we certainly wouldn't be encouraging anyone to plant now. But if you have a substantial Norwood maple providing shade to an area, I would think you'd want to save it rather than see it cut down. But maybe you could put in, not so much in the preservation, well, in preservation of landscape, you could talk about removal of offensive invasives. So for instance, creeping vines that are killing trees. We could add a section in there to require invasive removal to save the trees. But okay. I don't think I'd go as far as asking them to remove invasive species that are trees. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I actually, that's a good question, Chris. And I actually agree with you, Nora. This is something that I deal with this on my own lot because I'm a huge proponent of native plants, but I've allowed some Norway maples to stay after consulting with my arborist, who is also a huge proponent of native plants for exactly the reasons you said. But I would absolutely be in favor of adding a list of offensive, so that people understand too, it's part education. Mm-hmm. There's a ton of offensive invasives that are not only detrimental to trees, but also there's a plant that looks like milkweed that actually kills monarchs. So I think this is an opportunity to not just save some trees, but also to help people understand how to clean up their lots a little bit. So I would absolutely be in favor of that suggestion to add some specifics about things that we would like to see go.
Okay. I will try to come up with a list, and I'll probably also add a reference to some source that changes over time.
That's fantastic, Nora. I really like that idea too.
Nora, with respect to the 6-inch caliper, do we want to have some language that permits a smaller caliper? Just simply, I love the way you did this. I was just thinking if we use the 6 as a hard kind of stop, and whether it's like may require under, I don't know what kind of parameters, 4 or 4 to 6 or something that might be smaller than the 6. I was just uncomfortable with the hard stop of 6 without some
Right.
discretionary flexibility.
Yeah, you could require them to show every tree on the site if you wanted to. I don't have the full bylaw handy right now, but there's a decision criteria that says that you have looked at it and made sure that every tree of 6 inches or greater where it can be maintained has been maintained, and that's why I went with 6. But for the purposes of submitting the plan, you could ask for smaller trees than 6. There is a point where there's diminishing value because you cost the project so much to have to survey every single tree.
Yeah, I in my own mind, I was thinking 1 or 2 is too small, but that's why somehow I was saying like in the 4 to 6 range might be where we might want to have the discretion to have that, either evaluated or something.
Would you like me to change it instead of locating all existing trees with caliper size of 6? You want to say 4 to 6 of between 4 and 6 inches, or
I would,
or just greater than 4?
I have a question related to this, if I could. Are we consistent with conservation and the caliper size?
Good point.
So I believe conservation has a much higher number that they use. I will check with them to see.
It seems, I don't know, it seems onerous to make an applicant who has to go before planning and conservation to respond to 2 different requirements that are tree size.
Well, whichever has the smaller calipers,
I guess
the one
that's
that would
yeah.
dictate what they do. Yeah.
I guess on the face of it, I don't like being inconsistent with another government agency.
I'll check with them. I know that theirs would be in their regulations, not in a bylaw, and they are getting ready to revise the regulations. So we can make sure that we agree on whatever that number is.
And there's no other board that would have tree removal or caliper size in any of their bylaws or regulations?
No.
Okay, just wanted to bring it up to try to be consistent. Ellen, you had a question?
More of a statement. To that end, that's a fair point. We should be consistent. I also agree that we should go with whatever the smaller one is. Maybe conservation has different ideas. I know they're looking at, it's on their agenda every meeting to look at a tree planting or a tree policy bylaw. I would argue for, no greater than 6 inches, because if their current bylaw or regulations is more than that, then in my opinion, that's too lax. It needs to be tightened up. So I would argue that 6 would be the minimum. Or the maximum, sorry, would be the maximum. I like the idea of 4 to 6, but I wouldn't really love to see, 8, 10, whatever, because then we're losing a lot of trees in the process. So
if you say 4 to 6, it will become 4.
Right.
Yeah. But I echo Ellen. I would say 4 if that was possible without being, if conservation has such a larger number, I still think that's a little. I guess my preference is 4, but I'll go with others' thoughts.
I'm just thinking it through, the 4 versus the 6. There's, having looked at a lot of lots, there's a lot of 4-inch trees that are just not, they're just going to get in the way of a developer, and it's going to be problematic, I think, if we, I'm just thinking, trying to think again, see around all the corners. I don't want to be, too easy for a developer to come in and remove everything, but at the same time, I want to be realistic, and we have a lot of wooded lots in our town, and I just don't want to put too much on a developer where it can't be developed, essentially.
So what this is
Yeah, and-
saying is that you have to demonstrate where the trees are that are of a decent enough size to consider, not a sapling, but
Okay.
four
So-
inches is small. So a 4-inch tree is like the new trees that we typically require for street trees. So it's not a very large tree. A 6-inch tree is not moving. It's not bending. It's a strong,
Right, but
not
if you
quite an
require an
old growth
arborist,
tree, but a mature tree is when it gets to 6 inches. So that's, I think, why we have looked at that in the past, but this is just for how they have to show it on their plans.
okay, yeah. it
And in
wasn't
the
a
case of
removal.
a property that comes before you that's completely wooded, you still have the ability to waive this if you choose to. If you know that there's a section of the property where the building is going to go and you know the whole property is wooded, you may decide not to require them to count every tree in the center where that building is necessarily going to go, but you might make them show you the trees along the outside that you want to pick and choose which can be preserved.
That's a good reminder. Thank you. We do have that right to waive that.
And Chris, how would you feel about just instead of 4 or 6, 5?
That's not an even number. That throws me off. I don't know. I know 6 is already in our bylaws. I think Nora referenced that it's already existing.
Mhm.
I'm good with 6. I'm just, again, trying to be mindful of what we're trying to do. It really just comes down to putting on a tree schedule, right? For an arborist to
Right.
identify everything on the property. Again, there's probably double the amount of a fairly wooded area. There's twice as many 4s as there are 6.
Mhm.
So in all the new saplings are coming up. So
Depends
it
on the
basically
maturity
just-
of the wooded area.
Yeah, clearly, yes. It's going to put a little more financial responsibility on the developer to pay an arborist to make a denser map of the property. So I don't have a problem with it. I just wanted to discuss it as we're talking about a change.
So we had an application, it was an earth material movement application, so it wouldn't have fallen necessarily under this section, but there was an application for a new home that was going on Fox Meadow Drive. And the applicant came and said, I don't want to spend the money to count every tree because I know my house is going here and I know I have to take all these trees down. So it's just a, nonsensical exercise. So if the board were to see something like that, you could very well say, you're right, we'll grant a waiver. But there might be another application where, they're deciding where it's maybe a larger development and there's a lot of forested area and they're trying to choose the sections where the buildings should go. And a plan like this would be very helpful in that case.
Yeah. Ellen, did you have something to say?
Yeah, related, and it's actually a question of, is it within our purview, if we're talking about, we do talk about replacement, is it in our purview to specify native versus non? Because I'm thinking of a house not far from mine where it was exactly like what you're describing, wooded lot, they cleared a lot of trees to build the house, and then they've since replanted, but they've replanted Norway spruces, Norway maples. I would prefer to see like a white pine and a red, or something that's a native plant rather than introducing these, I don't want to call them invasives, but non-natives that they're lovely to look at, but eventually they're going to take over and they're messing up the ecosystem. Is that in our purview to say that, or is that more of a conservation commission?
You could do that.
Yeah.
So in your site plan reviews, which are really commercial, non-residential structures or multifamily residential is what you're looking at. You have the ability to accept a landscape plan and you can determine what plants are permitted on that landscape plan. When it gets to the Conservation Commission, they almost always look to make sure there are no non-invasives. For years, I think they've caught that every time. We probably haven't. I'm sure we've approved some plans that have had some non-native species on them, but we can make that clear in the standards here, saying that the all new plantings must be native plantings.
I think that's why I'm asking, because if we're editing the bylaws now, if it's within our purview and we can kind of make that explicit, I think that would be good. Because you're right. I think in general, all of us with a capital W tend to catch it. But like I said, this house was built last year, and I see non-native species coming in. So it'd be good to really make it clear that that's the expectation if we can. So I would advocate for putting that in writing.
Okay, I will add that.
I guess to that point, we would not be hearing a single family home anyway. That would
Right.
not come before us. So we would do subdivisions. And that's about it, right? For homes?
Right. So street trees in subdivisions and perimeter plantings in commercial developments or institutional developments. But you require plants all the time. You require new trees on
Right.
just about every project that comes before you. And you don't necessarily require that they be native species. If they go to the Conservation Commission too, due to the amount of disturbance, or if it's near a wetland, then they pick it up and make sure that they're all native. But we can make sure it's in your site plan review guidelines that only native species can be planted as new plants.
Yeah, I definitely support that change. And I hear that we cannot influence individual residential owners. And I feel the heartbreak that we can't even make a very gentle suggestion. It's just not what we do. But what we can do, I think we should.
We can set a good example.
Exactly.
Any other comments, questions on Nora's work on this tree?
I'll just
issue?
make one last pitch on the identification provision, which is 7.3.7.12 that Nora has. And I think the idea of the sustainability would be enhanced by a 4 or maybe a 5 as a compromise. And I guess that's my pitch.
I wouldn't have a problem with 5. I think I can go with the compromise personally.
There's Kate's influence.
Yeah.
All right, I will revise that to be 5-inch.
Well, unless there's board members that object to that.
Does anyone
that
prefer
through.
to see 6? And as I said, you can always waive it up to 6 if someone comes and tells you it's too expensive. Okay. Any other
I
areas
just
of
had
sustainability that you think we should tackle?
I had one thing I wanted to mention on the solar that you talked about, but while we're talking about trees, I happened to go through the Westwood Estates emergency access route. About half those trees are dead or dying.
Yes, they are. They
done.
lost a lot.
Yeah, I think a lot of people did in the summer's drought, but I just wanted to make sure it didn't pass us by without.
It doesn't. So we have a surety tripartite agreement, I believe, that's in place. They're ready to come and ask for their money back, and they just last week got their beta, went out there and reviewed the plans, so they know that they need to do work. Have to wait until spring.
I knew that was coming up, and that's kind of why I wanted to bring this up to you, because I just walked by it just last week and saw that. Back to the solar. Can you go up?
Yes.
I just want to go on a comment that you had made.
Renewable energy. Is that it?
I'd written down height allowance on a house. You had mentioned something about casting onto a neighbor's photovoltaic. Which section was that? Energy efficiency?
That was energy conscious design. So the last sentence there talks about efforts shall be made to harmonize energy related components with the character of the building and its surroundings, and to prevent adverse effects on the energy consumption of neighboring structures and on the environment. So
when we went through the exercise of altering our solar before, we actually did some research, I think, throughout the state, and saw that there were some towns that were restricting one person's right to build a home up, say turn a ranch into a colonial, where it may cast a shadow on their neighbor's solar. And I'm wondering how, Pat, you might weigh in on this. How can we affect this change on someone's property rights where we have height restrictions or allowances for as far as zoning setbacks? How do we It sounds like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth there.
So I think what we're doing here is we're saying that they should take that into consideration in their design. We're not saying you can't build up to your setbacks. You can't build your building at the height it's supposed to be. We're just saying that when you design your building, look at what options you have and see if there's a way you can do it that's better for your neighbor as well as better for yourself. But it does absolutely stop short of imposing additional setbacks, shadow setbacks. Some towns do that. Some towns have increased their setback requirements to prevent shadows from falling onto a neighboring property.
Okay,
We
I
don't
wanted
do
to,
that.
when you made that comment, I wanted to revisit that.
It's just about energy conscious design. So when you're designing your property, think about energy as a component and think about not only energy on the property you're designing, but on your neighbors as well. But it's pretty loosey-goosey. It's not a hard and fast requirement. It's just
Right. It's more of a guideline than it is a hard and fast requirement like a structural height or setback requirement.
Okay, so those still remain the primary rights
they do.
for
They
the
do.
property owner. Okay.
Yeah.
Any
But
other
so this
comments or
section, these are
questions? Sorry.
the design review standards, and any applicant who submits a application for site plan review, they need to address in a narrative document how their project addresses each of these standards. So they at least have to think about it, and then they have to write to you to say how they've looked at it and why they have or haven't taken that into consideration. It helps to have it in as a standard so that there's a chance of it being met. If it's
They have
not
to at least
there,
think
it's not
about
there.
when they say no.
They at least have to address it.
Mhm.
Right. I get it. Okay. Any other board members' comments, questions for what we've talked about so far?
Yeah, Nora, I love the fact that there's a cutoff in here at 5,000 square feet for the implementation of the photovoltaic. I'm just having a hard time conceptualizing what 5,000 square feet looks like. Any sort of benchmark that you could throw out there?
I have to look it up, but probably on the run, maybe about that. Maybe it's a little bit less than that. I'm trying to think of a property. One of the smaller shops at University Station, like Chipotle, is probably about 5,000 square feet.
Okay.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe that might be less than that. That might be less. I know that here's an example. I know I believe Del Frisco's is just over 8,000 square feet. So if you can picture the size of that building. So
Awesome. And I guess a second part of that, because I don't want this to be exorbitantly onerous on, small businesses that might come into town, or, non-residential structures that, really are trying to get by, and I don't know. But at the same time, I do want to impose, or try to encourage, our non-residential developments to incorporate sustainability. And, a lot of times the larger those developments get, the more energy intensive they get. So I do like that it's also, a percentage of the projected energy use. Was there, or is there any appetite to increase that minimum standard for larger projects, I guess, to the group?
I'd be on board with that because that does seem fair, right? The larger projects are generating more need. Frankly, they're drawing more. So I'd be on board with that. I'm not sure what kind of sliding scale or what the cutoff would be, but I would be interested in looking into more of a spectrum rather than just a one size fits all. Again, I agree. I love what you've put together, Nora. I think we could take it further.
I was going to
Nora, would
suggest some
that-
kind of just taking Josh's idea and running with that. I think that's a great idea. As some kind of progression as you get to greater and greater amounts, some scaling, if that works.
So Nora, we used to have large and small scale. Would this bring us back to that type of a setup?
So
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we still do have large scale and small scale under our solar bylaw. We don't necessarily regulate them all that much differently. We have other solar, but we still do have there was a cutoff, and I think it was 5,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Or was it, I have to look it up now because I don't remember if it was 5,000 square feet or if it had to do with the kilowatts that would be in a
Yeah, I remember
panel
that
of
was
that
up for
size. I
discussion.
don't remember, but
Yeah, just an idea. The only other thing that I was sort of mulling over is underwater efficiency. I would love to see if there was any opportunity to encourage people or over a certain size of development to potentially, require, any type of rainwater reclamation or something that's not just efficiency based, but almost supportive. Like it creates, or captures new water, uses it for their own,
Consumption.
whatever. Yeah, consumption, I guess. Yeah. So,
Usage.
yeah.
I was
Okay,
also
I
going
can
to
add
toss
that.
out just on energy conscious as compared to just efforts. Best efforts might be a little bit too onerous, but I was going to say reasonable efforts, kind of strengthen it just as compared to a bare minimum, kind of give them a little bit of a nudge to
Sure.
do reasonable efforts.
Okay.
Anyone else with comments? Ideas?
Yeah, I just wonder, two things, right? For the water efficiency, if there's a way to measure that as well versus them just having something there that doesn't really do anything. And for the renewable energy, I'm just curious if folks, similar to the charging stations where it's just as efficient to get two as it is to get one, they kind of come in twos. Do we feel like we need, if we're going to have people participate in the renewable energy for 50% of their projected use, do we think they won't do more if they can? Is it, why would we think that we need to tell them to do more if they're going to be larger?
So, I guess for me at least, the crux is, will they do it, right? Like there's plenty of small and large scale developments that do not have photovoltaic cells on them. And I mean, something like this would mandate that, right? But it would mandate for a larger organization or a larger footprint to have, well, potentially have more, if that was sort of my spitball. But yeah, I mean, I think any improvement is an improvement. So if this is, what the board feels comfortable with at 50% for 5,000, I think that's a great step. So
yeah, I mean, I feel like in our meeting we can encourage greater than 50%, but I don't want to be discouraging to larger development. I don't want to be discouraging to larger development necessarily. And I suspect that that if they're going to do it, they're going to take full advantage of it. And they won't do nothing. We're going to mandate that they do something. That's just because I feel like this technology is pretty far advanced. I think your point about the rainwater and that's a little less common, might be a little harder to get people to do it.
yeah, in that, I would only expect that on a large development, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I sort of saw the spectrum concept coming into play, where larger developments are going to demand more on the town water supply, the town energy infrastructure, the town sewer system, to be honest.
Yeah, and they're going to have more impervious surface. So I definitely like
Yeah.
that a lot. Yeah.
Do we have anything in mind for a hardship that somebody is going to build 5,000 square feet, but they just design of the building, lack of lot size? I was thinking about that Shell station we just talked about. and they pushed back on that idea. I think we suggested it. I'm just thinking out loud. Is there something here that, and maybe that wasn't even 5,000 square feet? I can't remember.
I think that was smaller. I think that was closer.
But
to
I'm just wondering
3,000.
about a possible development that really has no place for a solar setup.
So more often than not, it's the business doesn't want to spend the extra money to do it now, and they hope to do it somewhere down the line. They're trying to get their business or their new development up and running, and then they'll look at it later. Something like Target came back after the fact, and they put up the solar panels. They were not ready to commit to it when they got their approval, but they did come back and do it. There are other buildings, something like Wentworth Hall. It just would not have been feasible to put solar panels on that building because of it's much smaller. Well, I shouldn't say that. It is, if you include the basement, it's over 8,000 square feet, I think is the size. So it would have fallen under this if this was in place then. But the design of the structure with a what we call the bathtub in the center of it to capture the air conditioner units and other mechanical systems so that they wouldn't be visible from the street, they made a trade-off, and that was what they chose to do instead of solar panels. There are other properties where solar panels could work. For instance, I think the fire station, I think it was a matter of lack of budget. Probably the same on the police station. It was lack of budget, not necessarily that it couldn't be done. It just couldn't be done then. Might be able to go back to it later. On commercial buildings, I would say it's the same thing. In most cases, it's something that's not in the budget. But when a project is being designed, the budget goes to what is required to get the project up and running. And if you require either solar or wind power on a building, and that's a requirement from before they even design their building, they know that's a requirement, it's likely that money will go towards that.
So in the case of Wentworth, if that was a private developer, they would have had to make the choice that they're going to have to see all the ugly somewhere else because they have to put the solar up.
They would have brought that to you, and they would have asked, do you want this building to look like a residential building and fit with your area, and it's a historic building? Do you want to keep to the design of the historic structure, or do you want to improve the renewable energy possibilities with the building? And then the board would have had to make that choice, and you would have had to waive one or the other requirement, because there's also a requirement about Main Street and High Street and Washington Street architectural compatibility. So you would have had to balance those two and choose which one was more important to you and give a waiver for the one that wasn't. So you'll be in the same position with this going in the future. If this gets adopted, these are options for, if everything is possible, you ask for it all. And if not, then you waive what you think is would be less of a loss.
Does it make sense to try to put a time parameter in the renewable energy where we say produce a minimum of 50%, and we say within 2 years, within 3 years, within 5 years, within a time parameter, which allows someone to get it up and running, where you have those startup costs, but then they know down the line they have to get the clock's ticking and getting it in place?
You could say that produces 50% of the annual energy use within
blank time.
Yeah, within the first 5 years of the building, or 2 years of the building, 2 years after certificate of occupancy. You could do something like that. I do think that it's possible in a case like that they'll wait to do it though. So I go back to that property where they had their approval for 2 years and then came in and said, well, we didn't put in the trees and now our budget's blown and we can't afford to put in the trees. Can we get a waiver? I think you'd see more of that if you do have a little bit of a delay there. If it's not done at construction, it's not included in that initial construction budget, it might not be done, and they might come back to you in 2 years and say, we couldn't afford it. Can you waive it?
Could we condition that you make allowances? Didn't they make accommodations at the fire station for future possible?
They did.
Future?
So yes, the fire station, I think the police station too, it's solar ready. It's built so that it can accommodate solar panels. And now in the case of the police station, I think the the desire is to instead put them on canopy structures in the parking lot.
But the real work has been done in the sense that you don't have to pull the building apart to.
Right, the building's
Make it-
designed, and I think we see that with most commercial development, that buildings are built solar ready. It's just that sometimes it's quicker than other times about getting those solar panels up there.
Yeah, but at the very least, that might be a step in our conditions, that it's more than just recommended or suggested, that no, if you want to make this building, it needs to be solar ready.
And
Show us that
you would always have the option that if someone asked for a waiver of this, you could say, well, rather than just waive it outright, we will waive it for a period of X years, and then you'll have to put it on. You build the building solar ready, and instead of putting the either the solar panels or the wind energy resource up there at the start, you come back and you do it by such and such a date. So that's, you could give waivers are not always to eliminate a requirement. They can also lessen or delay a requirement.
Kate, did you have something to say? Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I was just curious, is this a place where we would mention bike racks, Nora?
Sure. So right now you have your bicycle standards that require bike racks in all developments according to your standards, but we don't have something in the bylaw. I don't believe that's, well, actually I have to check in the parking section. I think there is a requirement for bicycle parking, but if you want to increase that, this would be a bylaw amendment that you could do anything related to sustainability.
Yeah, I'd love to know what that is. And then, because it seems to be, for me anyway, just like it is tonight with this discussion, it's a little bit of an afterthought. And I'd like it to be more of an initial consideration.
A before thought.
I'll take
A
look at
before
the
thought, yeah.
bicycle ones.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anything else? Okay, so let me move down to the next proposed bylaw. So this is for dumpsters. So I've tackled this in two ways. This is just a very small section change. Right now we have a section in our zoning bylaw for screening, and there is some mention of dumpsters here, but it wasn't terribly clear. So I tried to clarify it a little bit more. It required uses requiring screening. All these uses were only required if the use that you're trying to screen was visible from normal eye level from any point on an abutting lot in a residential district. Well, that leaves out a whole lot of dumpsters. So what I've done is I thought about that section. I think that section really was intended to limit when you have to screen a parking lot. You don't have to screen the parking lot at University Station, but you do have to screen a parking lot on Blueberry Lane, where there's a dance studio, right? Where it's close to other houses where they would be looking at it. So I moved that description of if visible at normal eye level. I actually probably want to take out the normal. I don't think that's necessary there. If visible at eye level from any point on an abutting level in a residential district, and only use that qualifier on that parking requirement. And then all of the other requirements, I think they stand on their own. And section 6.3.5.3 is the one where dumpsters were required. And I just tried to tighten that up a little bit, saying now any refuge disposal and dumpster area, compactor, trash and or recycling container associated with a non-residential or multifamily residential property, every one of them would have to be screened. So you still don't have to screen the trash cans at your house. You can put them in your garage if you want, but if you want to leave them outside, you can do that. But if you have multifamily, which is, I believe, 3 units or more, and commercial, every single one of those dumpsters would then have to be screened. I separated out the outdoor storage of goods that was in that section mixed in with dumpsters. I don't think they're the same thing, so I just gave it its own section. And I think that's all I did to change the uses that required screening to make sure all dumpsters are among those. But then for the screening standards, I made some changes. oh, so one really hasn't. I'm just changing this section, so I caught this while I was looking at it. 6.3.6.3 said planting shall be of trees of a species common to the area and appropriate for screening. Well, in the most cases where you're using a plant for screening, it's not necessarily a tree. In many cases, it's a shrub. So I just made sure that we could include that as well. Fencing used for screens can't be chain link. So it had previously said fences shall be solidly constructed of wood, stone, or brick or other materials, but I think it needs to be clear that you're allowed to have a chain link fence in your yard if you want, but if you're using your fence for screening, then it can't be chain link. And then I added this section to try and capture some of the conditions that you put in some recent decisions where you require integral lids on dumpsters. So this section is new. It says dumpsters, compactors, trash and or recycling containers shall be fully screened from view by gated solid enclosures constructed of wood, stone, brick, or similar materials, and shall not include chain link fencing with or without vinyl privacy slats. Dumpsters, compactors, trash and or recycling containers shall have an impermeable lid or cover integral to the dumpster, compactor, or container itself, and shall be located on an impervious surface designed to prevent the discharge of contaminated runoff or leachate into the soil, groundwater, or surface water. Gates shall be closed and fastened at all times other than active loading and or unloading of trash and or recycling materials. So all of that comes right out of your recent decisions. And I think it just clarifies that all dumpsters have to be screened and that they don't have to be just screened with the enclosure, but they actually have to be closed so that we're protecting the area around them as well. So that's one way that I tackle dumpsters. And then as we get down a little bit later, I also propose some changes to the general bylaw that would also tackle them.
Nora, one of the things I see a lot are just the gates open in front of the dumpster. Say a guy throws out a box in recycle and then just walks back to work and leaves the gate wide open.
Yeah.
Is there a way to make like a self-closing that's not too hard for someone to come empty the dumpster, but can be latched open?
There are latches. You can require self-closing latches, and that I think I probably wouldn't put that in a bylaw. I would put that in your decisions requiring self-closing latches. There are some properties where they might be more appropriate than others, depending on what it is you're putting in the trash and how heavy it is and how long it takes for you to get out there and whether it's a one-person job or a two-person. So I think that would probably need some thought. We do have a lot of dumpsters that people leave open. And in fact, our building inspector is probably very tired of going and telling people that they have to close their dumpsters to comply with our laws, but it happens all the time. One of the worst offenders, I won't say, but there's a property that the dumpster isn't clearly visible from the street, but it still has to be closed, and it often isn't. And you know what? Businesses that
I
leave
can think
their
of one that's
dumpsters open,
always open and very clearly.
they're paying for other people's trash, so you know it's in their benefit to keep those dumpsters closed and latched.
When on this wording you say shall be located on an impervious surface designed to prevent the discharge of contaminated runoff. Are we thinking like if it's asphalt, like an asphalt curb, so it doesn't go behind the dumpster? Or? It
could be asphalt, or it could be concrete. In some cases, depending on what the material is, if it's in our water resource protection area and the board is going to issue a special permit for an operation there, you'd go further than that. At University Station, there are dumpsters that have completely impermeable basins under them. Like little tubs that actually the sides come up, and it's not like concrete that eventually seeps through, or asphalt. There's nothing going through that. So it'll all depend on the specific instance, but generally say you have a bank that has a lot of paper that they're putting in their dumpster, just making sure the dumpster is not on the grass is probably sufficient. If it's on a concrete area or asphalt, that's probably sufficient. In other cases, you're going to want it to be with a built around rim that protects it, especially if say it's a medical office, right, that has I don't know, alcohol and things like that you just don't want something out.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from board?
Yeah, Nora, I'm just curious. So this screening bylaw would only impact multifamilies and commercial, right?
Right. So this doesn't get it. I know you and I had talked about going beyond this and looking at construction dumpsters and temporary dumpsters on residential properties. That doesn't tackle this. I think you could do that in a general bylaw, which I only just started writing, but this is really just for permanent dumpsters on properties that the planning board has some approval authority over. So it doesn't go towards single and two family structures. Next, housekeeping amendments. I have to tell you, I found so many, looking at the bylaw, so many little things. So there's, I think, 10 different housekeeping revisions. They're all very minor. Overlay districts, we had so three of them that were out of order alphabetically, and one of them, our new mixed-use multifamily residential overlay district, just wasn't included. So somehow that got missed. So that's my proposal to correct the bylaw by putting them in alphabetical order and making sure it includes every overlay district. And I will go back and check to make sure I'm not forgetting about one. This is kind of funny. Senior residential development, that was removed from the bylaw in 2016. There's still, we removed the section on senior residential development, but it popped up in a couple of other references. This is one of them. So we have to take it out here, and we also have to take it out later in the parking section. Here, this is in the principal use chart, and the same thing happens in the accessory use chart. Our footnotes are out of order. We'd have a footnote 1, or it goes down to maybe footnote 10 coming before footnote 8. So I just reordered the footnotes. That happens in 2 places in the principal use. So it's not a change, it just clarifies our bylaw and just makes it clear and consistent. And then the same thing happens, those are the footnotes themselves, the same thing happens in accessory uses where we have footnote 3 coming before footnotes 1 and 2. So I corrected that. And there's reordering the notes themselves. Here's the table of parking requirements that still had senior residential development. So we pull that out because that is no longer a use. Video media display is section 6.2.10.5, but its subsections were 6.2.9.5.1, 2, and 3. So we correct that. So all real little things. And I'm sure by the time we get this before town meeting, I will have found more, but lots of minor edits that are needed in the zoning bylaw. Okay, so then the general bylaw I'm proposing with amendments relative to dumpsters. I found two areas of the bylaw that I thought could stand to be revised. The first one is that there's a section that only applies to retail stores and food establishments. That's chapter 321. It mostly addresses hours of operation. And the last line in it says that you can't have waste removed between midnight and 6 a.m. And I think it's lost in that section. So I suggest that we pull it out and just simply say there they have to comply with the other section where you actually address waste removal. So there's a section in the bylaw called in the general bylaw called solid waste. And it only has one really short section right now that essentially says you can't litter. And that's it. So I think that's the title is solid waste. It seems like a perfect section to address dumpsters. So I'm proposing adding some new subsections to that. The first one would say, this refers to waste as opposed to trash. I think we probably want to be consistent between our zoning bylaw and our general bylaw. But because this was called solid waste, I just started in that direction. I think I would like to go back in, change the solid waste to trash and change all the sections of waste to trash rather than make all the changes that would have to be made in our zoning bylaw. But I'll look at both of them and see what makes more sense. So the first section just essentially says why you're doing this for the purposes of controlling the maintenance and operation of dumpsters to protect and promote public health, safety, environmental conservation, and general welfare. Thank you, Josh, for all that language. No person or entity shall operate, keep, store, use, or maintain a waste and or recycling container associated with a non-residential or multifamily residential property including without limitation a dumpster, compactor, or other container intended or used for trash or recycling materials, except in accordance with this section. Now, here I have limited it the same as the zoning bylaw, but this is an opportunity. If the board wants this to apply to dumpsters, trash everywhere, you have the ability to expand that. I would think it might be, better to take baby steps, but we can discuss that and see what it is the board wants to do. The next section I propose discusses dumpster covers and enclosures. Any waste and or recycling container associated with a non-residential or multifamily residential property shall have an impermeable lid or cover integral to the dumpster, compactor, or container itself, and should be located on an impervious surface designed to prevent the discharge of contaminated runoff. Goes on and on. It's the same language that's in the zoning bylaw. You don't have to do both. You could do one or the other. By having it in the general bylaw, you capture all businesses, including existing ones, whereas zoning, you really only capture what comes before you for site plan review. Dumpster maintenance, I added this section. This is other language that Josh had suggested. All waste and or recycling containers shall be in good condition, free of damage caused by wear or misuse that would allow leaks or access by rodents. All such containers shall be deodorized and washed on a semi-annual basis to prevent persisting putrescence of the buildup of potentially harmful or dangerous residues. The health director or sanitarian may require more frequent cleaning if necessary. If rodent activity or other site hygiene issues are prevalent, the health director or sanitarian may require additional design containment requirements utilizing best available technology. So also another thing on the general bylaw as opposed to zoning bylaw, it's not just the building commissioner who enforces it. Whoever you choose to put in there to enforce it can do it. In this sense, I think it makes a lot of sense for it to be the health director or sanitarian. And then I captured the hours down here. Waste and or recycling containers shall not be filled more than 1 hour before the start of business or 1 hour after the close of business of any associated commercial establishment, nor between the hours of 12 a.m. and 6 a.m. at a multifamily residential property. Said containers shall not be emptied between the hours of 12 a.m. and 6 a.m. So it's not changing the hours, it's the same hours that were already recorded, but previously those hours only applied to retail and restaurants. So this applies to anyone who has a dumpster other than the single family or two family zone. Any thoughts on that and how far you might want to go with dumpster requirements?
Nora, any consideration to specifying who's going to enforce them? I know you just stated there's some discretion, but
yeah,
sometimes when you're doing bylaws, you have something you want to do, but you don't know how you want to operationalize it in real life. So I'm wondering.
The general bylaw, I think our general bylaws, unless it says otherwise, it's enforced by our police department, unless it says otherwise. So where we mention the health director or the sanitarian, they could be the enforcement agent for the entire bylaw. I don't think you really want to have police going out and checking people's dumpsters. That doesn't seem like a good use of their time.
No, it really, yeah.
But it's also something that the building commissioner would prefer not to spend his time doing.
Well, yeah, it's not, I don't think it's a desired activity, but I just think sometimes there's been a kind of, in my world, how are we going to operationalize this situation? And I just encourage you to think about that. You don't have to make a decision tonight.
Well, it is, we have dumpster noncompliance right and left. We have a land use meeting and it's a monthly topic. It's always up there, the list of dumpsters in town that are noncompliant. So I think we do need to address it. It's a question of how far we will go. Now,
and who and
dumpsters I'm talking about are just those commercial dumpsters and
I know.
If we're looking at beyond that, construction dumpsters,
I think that's.
you may need an employee, a staff member to enforce that.
Well, I also think if you have a construction dumpster, you're going to have on-site inspections by the building department. So that might be a logical place for that to be enforced.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a If you have a restaurant, you have the Board of Health.
Department. Mhm.
Yeah. And perhaps maybe that needs to be specified in just a suggestion in the bylaw so that we know who to turn, it's readily identifiable who's responsible.
I agree.
Yeah, and furthermore, you know, in terms of
Operationalize.
operationalizing, thank you. You know, in terms of applicable fines or, you know, not punitive, but like what is the escalation? It's
What's the teach?
yeah. So I
Yeah, so
think
I
that,
haven't added anything in there for fines, but we absolutely can. So this is the section where you would put it. Violation of this section is punishable by a fine of $100 an offense or something along those lines. I don't think you want it to be significant, just enough to give someone a slap on the wrist to make sure they comply.
You want to get their attention. A fine is designed to get their attention and to be a change agent.
yep. Absolutely. You know, I think it makes sense as written. You know, I think the health director makes good sense to, you know, be the agent for levying a lot of this, especially when it's a business, especially obviously restaurants, in which I think they already sort of own in their own way. You know, I personally do think that some sort of oversight or requirement for construction dumpsters is appropriate. I'm not saying it has to be the same level as for a permanent dumpster, but, you know, I think if we had a step down, you know, that it's going to be in good condition, that it's going to be covered when not in use, that debris isn't going to be flying all over, you know, neighbors' yards. You know, those are all very logical, and I think things that people can get behind and probably have experience even in their own neighborhoods with issues. You know, I have a construction dumpster now, or I just did, and then I had to yell at my GC for, it was like leaking all this gunk onto the ground and was going towards the storm drain. Yeah, it did not make me happy. So, you know, it happens to all of us, but you know, a GC is not going to be as inclined to do anything when it's not a requirement. Right. And I think, again, the building inspector would be a good person to help enforce that. And again, it would be, you know, both by a complaint or inspection that you could start to enforce this stuff.
Mm-hmm. I will first talk to the building commissioner and see if there's something along the lines of building permits there could be a stipulation added to building permits to address it that way. And if not, then we can add another section here if there's support from the full board to address temporary dumpsters.
Josh, there's a tendency sometimes when people pull a construction dumpster up to have people in the neighborhood say, here's an opportunity to get rid of something I want to get rid of. Did you experience that?
I saw a couple of pieces of furniture go in there. I didn't see anything that was like strictly forbidden, but like that happens. People's motor oil gets dumped in there and everything else. It's like, oh, I don't want to go to whatever reclamation center or the hazardous waste pickup for the town host. So yeah, it happens all the time.
I agree.
Nora, I want to be mindful where we're adding quite a bit of jurisdiction, or for lack of a better word, to I don't want to put too much on the health director, the building inspector. I mean, we're a small town. We still have a lot of building projects going on around town that we would be adding potentially to the building inspector's daily job requirements, and to Mr. Orsini in the health department, and monitoring all that. I don't want to make it. It could become way too much for one department to look at. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. I mean, if they are going to be the sole enforcing agent for construction dumpsters or restaurant dumpsters, it's going to change how they approach each day. They're going to have to incorporate that into every day.
So it's a lot already. The majority of non-compliant dumpsters, believe it or not, are not restaurants. They're more likely
retail establishments.
retail, office, banks, those are the worst offenders right now. Those are the ones more often than not, they're not covered at all. They're paper dumpsters, but it's something that we're working on. It's already a problem. I think that by having a clear bylaw about it, you inform people that this is the requirement. And once people get used to complying, they're likely to continue complying. It's getting the compliance to start with. It's very difficult.
I also think it's important, if you're going to propose these, that someone reach out to the various people who will be enforcing them so they understand what you're trying to do and you get their buy-in for it.
Yes.
Because otherwise it'll be a lot longer, harder pull for you to get it through.
So when any bylaws that this board looks at, they all go before a land use committee that involves all the staff members that would be responsible, and they all comment on them before your public hearing.
Does health go to land use?
Yes.
Okay.
Health, building, conservation, zoning, public works, police, fire, and the town administrator.
All right.
All
Any
right,
other
well,
thoughts from board members before we move on?
that's it. That's all I have so far. So there was one other bylaw that I had hoped to get to, and I have not had time to even do a first draft of it. That's a tree preservation bylaw, to go a little bit further than the tree provisions that we discussed earlier. We know of a couple of towns, Lexington and Weston among them, that have very strong tree protection or tree canopy protection bylaws. I just don't think I can do it this time around with still 2 employees out, with a lack of staff. So I don't feel confident that I will have something in time for you to review it, in time to get it before the select board as a warrant article and then move forward. So if any board members feel that that's a must for this term, I'll do my best to work on it, but I was not able to get to it yet.
Nora, I know in the past we've had board members contribute. If a board member feels strongly about maybe taking that ball and running with it, and then maybe you could oversee and edit. And if you don't have the bandwidth to take on the whole thing, if there is a board member who is interested, I would say get a hold of Nora and work it out and see if
I'm
that's
happy to
something.
work.
And if it doesn't work out, then we're at the same place we are right now of not addressing it this time around.
I'd like to get to it. I just really we're pressed for time, and I know that there are some pretty big applications coming down the line in the next month or 2.
Okay. I don't have a problem with that approach if any of the board members have a different thought. Okay.
All right, so that is the business end of your meeting. If there are any other bylaws that you wanted to tackle, for instance, the MUMFROD zone. So we now have Attorney General approval of the MUMFROD district. That doesn't mean we have Department of Community and Economic Development approval. So we still know that we don't meet the guidelines. The final guidelines say that Westwood does have to have 50 acres or more. We have about 16.5. The board should think about whether they want to just go with what we have and try and make a case to DHCD that we believe we meet the letter and spirit of the law, that 16.5 acres is a district of reasonable size, even if it doesn't meet the guidelines. Or let me know if you want to take on another bylaw and another attempt at expanding that district. So whichever way the board feels they'd like to go with that.
Is there still the same time constraint next December?
It's December 2024.
24, not 23.
Think no, it was originally. I'll look back at it. I believe it's December 2024. We have to submit this
right,
month
but we need to
progress plan.
Ellen, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm well, first I'll start with, I would lean towards trying, based on what I'm hearing from residents, that and just understanding what our town looks like and what kind of available space we have, I would be in favor of kind of trying to make a case that maybe we could get to 25, but I think 50, even though that's less than 75, without bulldozing a whole bunch of either existing properties or conservation land, I don't see how we're going to get to 50. So I would be willing to try and make a case. But my other question was, I had heard just, anecdotally and in some local news stories that there were some towns that were looking to kind of challenge this whole legislation. Do we know whether or not they're actually doing that? I'm just curious whether or not, is the law going to change again? Because if that's challenged and it changes again, we may not need to ever get to 50. I'm just curious what the status of that is.
Yeah, I've seen some of the same rhetoric that you described, but I haven't seen anybody bring an action. I think if they're challenging it, they may be challenging it through their local representation. But that's not something that I think is going to be out in the open real soon. Listen, I'm happy to do it any way that you want. If you want us to work with DHCD to try and get them to see things the way we see it, we're happy to try that as a first step. I mean, I'm happy to. I can't speak for Nora, but we work pretty well together, and we can try that. That's a prudent approach. If you wanted to, you have to understand, just because you set the table for something doesn't mean bulldozers are coming up. It means it can be zoned that way. So perhaps we need to think about strategically identifying some acreage that maybe might happen 50, 75 years from now. I don't know. So that we have the required acreage. But I'm more than willing to try and convince people that we've done it right once. So it's up to you. I'm willing to play it any way you want.
It's just my opinion. I'm also thinking about, feedback, that taking the temperature of the residents and how they feel about this as well. I think, there was a decent amount of concern about what we've already done. I've read some of the anonymous editorials in some of our local message boards. So I'm aware that there are always going to be people that think we should do nothing. I feel like we as a board and as a town have acted in good faith and tried to do something, not just because we've been told we have to, but because it makes sense in the areas that we've looked at. So that's just my opinion. I personally also don't necessarily want to zone stuff just because we have to, because I have my own feelings about, even with the revised guidelines, I still think this law is a bit of a one size fit all and a massive overreach, but that's just my opinion. But I think we could probably do more than what we've done, but I don't know that I would support trying to go to 50, even though we've been told we have to.
So the question that you folks have to answer for yourself is, how much do you think is right for Westwood? And you need to tell us that, and then we will carry the ball on that.
What's reasonable size?
Yeah.
So if I may, and I don't know if Chris is the right person to be kind of walking us through this discussion, but at this point in time, I feel like we had, as Ellen said, we acted in good faith. We're supported by our comprehensive plan. In these activities that we undertook, we were supported by the town to do just what we did. And I'd like to see how what we have done has played out before we, and where everything lands before we take any further steps or even discuss any other areas. We do know that it has to be within a half a mile of the stations. I feel like that's enough to have put people kind of on alert that their zoning might be changing until we find out what we need to do.
Yeah, I would echo that sentiment, Kate. I'm fine with what we've done. I feel good that everything we did was in the interest of the town as well as the interest of the state. And did they remove the contiguous part of the guideline?
They lessened it. They didn't completely remove it. They just gave a little bit more flexibility. I think they also gave some flexibility in that half mile range. a portion of the district should be within a half a mile. All of the district does not have to be within a half a mile. So that gives us a little bit more flexibility if we ever get to a point where we want to look at additional land that.
So one of the
But I
things
feel that the board did an excellent job in establishing a district that worked for Westwood. So I would be perfectly comfortable hanging our hat on that and pushing forward.
So I was very reticent to bring up any already established neighborhoods or addresses for the understanding the pushback from those people and those neighboring was just going to be so strong that we would be really up against it at town meeting. So I felt like we identified the right areas, and I think we need to let this dust settle some, and let's see how it plays out. As you know, Ellen brought up, there's pushback from various towns to the state. So I still feel good, even if the whole law was repealed. I feel good about what we've done. I think we've identified an area to develop that was sorely underdeveloped, and I don't feel bad about how we zone for it right now. I think it's all good for our town.
Yeah.
I know that there are people detractors from that, but that's how it works out.
And we know where the Baker administration was on this legislation. We've got a new governor coming in. We don't know where she's going to be on it. And having a chance to read the tea leaves on those kind of things, I think is a prudent strategy. But it doesn't matter what I think, it only matters what you think. And what you can convince town meeting to think.
All right. Any other thoughts or comments from board members? And Josh and Phil, even though you weren't on when we did this, you're on now, so you have just as much say as we do.
I just want to thank Nora for all the hard work. She's doing multi-jobs, and just want to give my appreciation for that. She's doing a great job.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Chris, as somebody who wasn't on the board, I do agree that from everything I've seen, and I think it was the right choice to zone that area. I think you guys did a lot of work on that. I'm totally supportive, even not having been part of that decision, but I still think that was a good decision, and hopefully it helps mitigate or completely resolve us of any additional requirements that might come out of the state's mandates on this. So
Thanks.
All right, if there's no other zoning or general bylaw you want me to work on, then I'll firm up the ones that we have. Did you want to send, do you want to vote to send these off to the select board now, or would you like to take them up again at your January meeting, see the changes, and then all you send to the select board is the title, but still, if you'd like to have it more fleshed out, there is time. They're closing it at their first meeting in January. I know it's after January 3rd, January 5th. So there is time.
So yeah, we have
to take
2
it up at
days.
the next meeting. You don't have to vote tonight.
I personally like where we're headed, but I think we could use one more meeting to discuss these things.
Okay.
I would
That's
second
me.
that. I would agree with that. I think we're in a good spot, but just want to, have a little reflection time. I think January 3rd is where we look to get it done.
Okay, well, I'll make some revisions and get it out to you sooner this time, so you have more time to review it, and we'll take that up on January 3rd.
Nora, this is a hearing.
It is not a hearing, so this is
Okay.
just a discussion. So we started
what I
this
thought.
discussion in July, continued it in August, and tried to take it up at some very long meetings that we never got to. So it'll be on the agenda again in April, and I'm sorry, in January, and then you will have a formal public hearing in February. So at the January meeting, I would ask you not just to vote to send it to be placed on the warrant article, but I'd also ask you to approve the draft version so that I can get the ad in place so that we can have that hearing. So at that January 3rd meeting, we'll want to have fairly tight language that we're ready to put out there in a hearing notice so that we can have the hearing in February.
How is our January meeting looking from an agenda standpoint?
Well, we have the 24M that was continued, and we have an application that's coming up from Target on a lighting change that they're proposing. Those are the only ones that are firmly on that agenda. I expect we may have 1 or 2 A&R plans by then. And I think that's it.
Okay.
So you'll have time to discuss zoning.
Okay, good. All right.
The second meeting in January will be busy though.
Yeah, bring a snack. Next is meeting minutes. Is that next one?
Yes, and I apologize. Tiana was out last week and I tried to put them on myself and I don't know what I did. So I didn't get them so that they were visible for you. So I apologize that you didn't get to see them.
So if any board member had opportunity to read and would like to make a motion to, or have any changes made, sorry, if there's any changes to be made to the meeting minutes as submitted. If there are no changes, if anyone would like to make a motion to adopt the meeting minutes.
Yeah,
I moved it. Oh, go ahead, Kate.
I was just gonna
Okay,
say,
you-
I definitely read them. And I don't remember the date of the meeting.
November
Oh.
15th.
Thank you. I move that we accept the minutes from the November 15th, 2022 meeting as received.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the meeting minutes for November 15th? Seeing none, we'll take a roll call vote. Phil,
Aye.
Kate,
Aye.
Ellen,
Aye.
Josh.
Aye.
I vote aye also. Okay. Next, Nora.
Next, you have updates from agency and committee representatives. So, and I don't believe there have been any recent committee meetings. Excuse me, sorry, I have a barking puppy.
See that.
So unless anyone has anything to report, I don't have anything to report on that. And then the item after that is general miscellaneous updates and administrative items. And I have nothing to report there either. I wish I could report to you we had a new town planner, but we don't yet. So nothing to
Is it-
report.
Is that progressing or
No,
not as fast as you'd like?
no.
All
You
right,
know
well,
anyone, tell them to apply. And that's it. I think that unless a board member has any new business, you're ready to take a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
any further motion, a second, any discussion on adjournment? Hearing none. Josh,
Aye.
Kate,
Aye.
Phil,
Aye.
Ellen,
Aye.
I'm an aye. All right. Thank you,
Great.
everyone, for your work.
Happy New
tonight.
Year,
Well,
everybody.
Happy New
Good night.
Year.
Holiday.
Enjoy your
Happy
holidays.
See you
holidays.
next
Happy New
year.
Year, happy
Take
holidays.
care.
Thanks, Jessica.